don't apply to him. In just 35 seconds, a single comment would transform a routine interview into the most shocking moment in 60-year history, ending with security escorting royalty off the set. This is the story of how Prince Harry went from guest to gone on 60 Minutes. Anderson Cooper has interviewed presidents, dictators, and celebrities. He's known for his calm demeanor, his thoughtful questions, and his ability to make even the most guarded guests open up. When Prince Harry agreed to sit down for an exclusive interview, everyone expected a candid conversation about his life, his family, and his future. What they got instead was something nobody saw coming. The interview started normally enough. Harry walked onto the set, shook Anderson's hand, and settled into the chair across from him. The cameras began rolling. Anderson opened with a simple question about Harry's recent move to America and how he was adjusting to life outside the royal family. "I think it's been liberating," Harry said, leaning back in his chair. "For the first time in my life, I get to make my own choices without someone breathing down my neck about protocol or tradition or what's proper." Anderson nodded, following up with another question about the challenges of that transition. But something in Harry's tone had already shifted. There was an edge there, a defensiveness that seemed out of place for such a straightforward question. "You know, Anderson, I'm not sure you'd understand," Harry said, cutting him off mid-question. "You've never had to live under that kind of scrutiny. You've never had your every move analyzed by millions of people." Anderson paused, processing the comment. "Well, as a journalist who's been in the public eye for decades, I'd say I have some understanding of scrutiny. But you're right, it's different. That's why I'm asking, to understand your experience." Harry waved his hand dismissively. "It's not the same thing at all. You chose this life. I was born into mine." The tension in the room was palpable now. The crew members exchanged glances. This wasn't going the way anyone had planned. Anderson, ever the professional, tried to steer the conversation back on track. "Let's talk about your charitable work," Anderson said, his voice steady and calm. "You've been involved with several organizations since moving to the States. What causes are most important to you right now?" "I think that's what people don't get," Harry interrupted again. "Everyone wants to put me in a box. Do this charity work. Show up here. Smile for these cameras. But what if I don't want to be defined by charity work? What if I just want to be seen as a person?" "Of course," Anderson replied, "but you agreed to this interview. I'm simply trying to learn more about who you are as a person. Your work is part of that." Harry leaned forward, his expression hardening. "Did I agree to this interview, or did my publicist agree to it? Because I'm starting to wonder why I'm even here." Anderson remained composed, though a flicker of confusion crossed his face. "If you'd rather not continue, that's entirely your choice. But you did confirm this interview yourself last week when we spoke on the phone." "Maybe I changed my mind," Harry shot back. "Or maybe I just don't like the way you're conducting this. You're trying to trap me. Every question is loaded." "I asked you about your charitable work," Anderson said, his voice still calm, but now with a hint of firmness. "That's hardly a trap." The room fell silent for a moment. Harry stared at Anderson, and Anderson held his gaze, unwavering. This was no longer an interview. This was a standoff. "You know what your problem is?" Harry said, his voice rising. "You sit there in your expensive suit with your perfect hair, pretending to care about people's stories. But really, you're just looking for the next headline, the next soundbite. You don't actually care about me or anyone else you interview." Anderson took a breath. "Harry, I've dedicated my career to telling important stories and giving people a platform to share their truth. If you feel I'm not doing that for you right now, I apologize. But I need you to understand that I'm treating you the same way I treat every guest who sits in that chair, with respect and genuine curiosity." "Respect?" Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about respect?" How about you stop interrupting me? How about you let me finish a sentence without jumping in with your next gotcha question? One of the producers stood up from behind the cameras, clearly concerned about where this was heading. Anderson noticed, but subtly gestured for them to sit back down. He could handle this. I haven't interrupted you once, Anderson said, his voice still measured. In fact, you've interrupted me several times. But I'm happy to give you the floor. Please, tell me what you want to talk about. Harry stood up. That's the thing, Anderson. I don't want to talk about anything. Not with you. Not on this show. This whole thing is a joke. Then why did you come? Anderson asked, genuine confusion in his voice now. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, someone in American media would treat me like a human being instead of a circus act, Harry said, his voice getting louder. But I was wrong. You're all the same. Vultures. Every last one of you. Anderson stood up now too, maintaining his composure, but clearly drawing a line. Harry, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. We can have a difficult conversation, but we're going to do it respectfully. Or what? Harry challenged. You'll kick me off your precious show? Go ahead. Do it. I dare you. The studio had gone completely quiet, except for Harry's heavy breathing. Every crew member, every producer, every person in that room was frozen, watching this surreal scene unfold. I don't want to end this interview, Anderson said carefully, but I also won't tolerate being spoken to this way. I've given you a platform to share your story. I've asked you fair questions. If you can't engage in this conversation with basic civility, then yes, we'll have to end this. Harry took a step closer to Anderson's desk. You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? Mr. Award-winning journalist. Mr. Integrity. Let me tell you something about integrity, Anderson. Real integrity is knowing when you're nothing but a puppet for a corporate news machine. That's enough, Anderson said, his voice firm now, the calm finally giving way to clear boundaries. This interview is over. Oh, I'm not done, Harry said, pointing his finger at Anderson. You want a story? Here's your story. The great Anderson Cooper couldn't handle a real conversation with someone who wasn't going to play by his rules. How's that for a headline? Anderson reached for the phone on his desk. Security, please come to Studio A. You're calling security on me? Harry's voice had reached a peak now, incredulous and angry. Are you serious right now? I asked you to leave. You refused. Yes, I'm calling security, Anderson replied, his professionalism somehow still intact despite the chaos. Harry laughed again, and that same hollow sound. This is unbelievable. This is absolutely unbelievable. Do you know who I am? And there it was, the question that changed everything. The moment that would be replayed over and over. Do you know who I am? Anderson looked at Harry, and for the first time in the entire exchange, something like disappointment crossed his face. Yes, Harry, I know exactly who you are, and I was hoping to have a conversation with that person. But instead, I'm dealing with someone who thinks their title means they can speak to people however they want. My title? Harry scoffed. My title is the only reason you wanted me here in the first place. Don't pretend this was about anything else. You're wrong, Anderson said simply. I've interviewed thousands of people. Some with titles, some without. I treat them all the same, because that's what journalism is. But if you can't see that, then we really are done here. 2 security guards entered the studio. They approached cautiously, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they'd just walked into. Gentlemen, Anderson addressed them. Prince Harry is leaving. Please escort him out. Harry looked at the security guards, then back at Anderson, then at the cameras that were still rolling, capturing every moment of this disaster. You're really doing this, Harry said, his voice now a mixture of anger and disbelief. You did this, Anderson replied. You came here, you accepted this interview, and then you decided to attack me personally instead of having a conversation. I gave you multiple opportunities to reset. You chose not to take them. One of the security guards gently touched Harry's elbow. Sir, if you'll come with us. Harry jerked his arm away. Don't touch me. Harry, Anderson said, his voice softer now. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. For a moment, something flickered in Harry's expression. Maybe it was realization. Maybe it was regret. But it passed quickly, replaced again by that same defensive anger. You'll regret this, Harry said, looking directly at Anderson. You have no idea what you've just done. I've protected my crew and maintained the integrity of this program, Anderson responded. If that's something I should regret, then I'll live with it. Harry looked around the studio one more time at all the faces staring back at him. The producers, the crew, the security guards waiting to escort him out. He shook his head. This is who you all are, he said to the room. This is American media. No respect. No decency. Just ambush television disguised as journalism. Harry, Anderson said, and there was something almost sad in his voice now. Nobody ambushed you. You ambushed yourself. That seemed to be the final straw. Harry turned on his heel and walked toward the studio exit, the security guards following close behind. Just before he reached the door, he turned back one last time. I hope you got your ratings, Anderson, he called out. I hope it was worth it. And then he was gone, the studio door closing behind him with a heavy thud that seemed to echo in the stunned silence that followed. Anderson stood there for a moment, collecting himself. Then he looked at the cameras, which were still recording everything. On he looked at his producers, who looked back at him with expressions of shock and concern. Did we get all of that? Anderson asked, his voice steady again. The cameraman nodded. Good, Anderson said, because people need to see what just happened here. Not because it makes for good television, but because it's the truth. And that's what we do here. We tell the truth. He sat back down in his chair, straightening his papers, composing himself. A makeup artist rushed over to touch up his face, but he waved her away gently. I'm fine, he said. Really? But everyone in that studio knew that what had just transpired was anything but fine. This was supposed to be a straightforward interview, a chance for Harry to share his perspective, to connect with an American audience, and to show who he really was beyond the tabloid headlines and royal drama. Instead, it had devolved into a confrontation that nobody wanted and nobody expected. And at the center of it all was Anderson Cooper, who had done exactly what he always did. Asked questions, maintained boundaries, treated his guest with respect while also expecting respect in return. Should we have stopped the cameras? One of the producers asked quietly. Anderson shook his head. No. If we had stopped rolling, people would say we hid what happened, that we protected him. This way, everyone can see exactly how it went down. They can judge for themselves. Another producer approached. Anderson, are you okay? That got pretty intense. I've been in war zones, Anderson said with a slight smile. I think I can handle an angry prince. But beneath the humor, and there was something else. A weariness, maybe. Or a disappointment that someone with so much privilege, so much opportunity to use their platform for good, had instead chosen to lash out at the very people trying to help them tell their story. What do you think happened? A young production assistant asked. Why did he get so upset? Anderson thought about it for a moment. I think he came in here expecting to be treated like royalty, and when he realized he was going to be treated like every other guest, like an actual person who has to answer questions and engage in a real conversation, he couldn't handle it. He wanted control, and when he didn't have it, he lashed out. But you didn't do anything wrong, the assistant said. I know, Anderson replied, but sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes people are dealing with so much internal stuff that they project it onto whoever's in front of them. I just happened to be in front of him today. The studio was starting to empty out now. Crew members were packing up equipment, whispering to each other about what they'd just witnessed. This would be the story they told at dinner parties for years to come. The day Prince Harry got kicked off 60 Minutes. Anderson gathered his notes, his movements deliberate and calm. He'd been doing this long enough to know that moments like this, as shocking as they were, didn't define him or his work. He'd interviewed everyone from Beyoncé to Barack Obama, from survivors of hurricanes to survivors of genocide. He'd sat across from terrorists and heroes, artists and activists. And through it all, he'd maintained the same standard. And ask fair questions. Listen carefully. Push when necessary, but never bully. Treat people with dignity while also holding them accountable. That's what he'd tried to do today. And if Harry couldn't see that, couldn't appreciate that, then that was Harry's problem, not his. "Do you think he'll apologize?" someone asked. Anderson shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. Either way, the interview speaks for itself. And it did. From the moment Harry started deflecting simple questions, to the personal attacks, to the final theatrical exit with security, every moment told a story. Not the story Harry probably wanted to tell, but a story nonetheless. A story about entitlement. About what happens when someone is so used to being treated a certain way that they can't function when those conditions change. About the collision between old world privilege and new world expectations. Anderson picked up his phone, checking for messages. There were already dozens. From colleagues, from friends, from his producers upstairs. Everyone wanted to know what happened, if he was okay, what they were going to do with the footage. "We're going to air it," Anderson said, answering the question before anyone could ask. "All of it, unedited." "Are you sure?" his senior producer asked. "It's pretty raw. Maybe we should at least cut some of the personal attacks." "No," Anderson said firmly. "If we cut it, we're protecting him from his own words. And that's not our job. Our job is to show what happened. Honestly and completely." The producer nodded, understanding. This wasn't about revenge or making Harry look bad. This was about transparency. About showing viewers that even 60 Minutes, even Anderson Cooper, isn't immune to difficult interviews that go sideways. As Anderson left the studio, he thought about all the other interviews he'd done that year. The touching conversation with the teacher who'd saved her students during a school shooting. The difficult but necessary questions for the politician caught in a scandal. The emotional sit-down with a family who'd lost everything in a wildfire. Those were the interviews that mattered. Those were the stories that needed to be told. This thing with Harry, it was a blip. A strange, uncomfortable blip, but a blip nonetheless. Still, as he walked to his dressing room, he couldn't help but replay certain moments in his mind. The way Harry's demeanor had shifted so quickly. The accusations that came out of nowhere. The final, "Do you know who I am?" that encapsulated everything wrong with the entire exchange. Yes, Anderson thought, I know exactly who you are, and that's the problem. Because somewhere along the way, Harry had forgotten that being a prince didn't make him immune to basic social contracts. Didn't give him the right to speak to people however he wanted. Didn't mean he could walk into an interview and expect softball questions and endless deference. Anderson had treated him the same way he treated everyone. With respect, yes, but also with the expectation that the respect would be mutual. And when Harry couldn't provide that basic courtesy, when he instead chose to attack and deflect and make accusations, the interview had to end. It was that simple. Back in the studio, a cleaning crew had started their work, where they moved around the space efficiently, wiping down surfaces, adjusting chairs, preparing for the next shoot. They'd been there for Harry's entrance, all smiles and royal charm, and they'd been there for his exit, escorted by security, still angry, still defiant. "Never seen anything like that," one of them said to a co-worker. "Me neither," came the reply. "And I've been working here 15 years. Because that's the thing. In 15 years, through hundreds of interviews, through countless guests of all types and backgrounds and temperaments, nothing like this had happened. Anderson had faced difficult interviews before. He'd had people cry, people get angry, people shut down completely. But he'd never had someone attack him so personally, so aggressively, for simply doing his job. And he'd certainly never had to call security to remove a guest. Until today. The footage would air later that week, and when it did, it would spark countless conversations. About Harry, yes. About his mental state, his adjustment to American life, his relationship with the media. But also about expectations, about respect, about what happens when someone confuses their status with their substance. People would take sides. Some would defend Harry, saying Anderson had been too harsh, too confrontational. Others would defend Anderson, praising him for maintaining his standards and not giving special treatment just because someone had a royal title. But those debates would come later. Right now, in this moment, Anderson was just a journalist who'd tried to do an interview and ended up in a situation he never wanted and never expected. He changed out of his suit, hanging it carefully. Tomorrow there would be meetings, discussions about how to present the footage, what context to provide, how to handle the inevitable backlash from both sides. But tonight, he just wanted to go home, to decompress, to try to make sense of what had just happened in that studio. Because at the end of the day, beneath all the drama and the tension and the shocking exit, there was a simple truth. Anderson Cooper had done his job. He'd shown up, prepared thoughtful questions, and tried to have a meaningful conversation. And Prince Harry had walked into that studio carrying baggage that had nothing to do with Anderson or 60 Minutes or American journalism. He'd brought his anger, his defensiveness, his deep-seated need to be treated as special. And when he didn't get that treatment, when he was instead treated like everyone else, he couldn't handle it. So he lashed out, and he got escorted out. And somewhere in all of that, there was probably a lesson. About humility, maybe. About recognizing that respect is earned, not demanded. About understanding that titles and privilege only get you so far. But whether Harry would learn that lesson remained to be seen. For Anderson, the lesson was simpler, and one he'd already known. Sometimes, no matter how professional you are, no matter how fair your questions, no matter how much you try to create a space for genuine dialogue, it just doesn't work out. And that's okay. Because integrity isn't about every interview going perfectly. It's about maintaining your standards even when things get difficult. Especially when things get difficult. As he left the building that evening, Anderson passed by the studio one more time. The lights were off now, the space quiet and empty. In just a few hours, it had been the site of one of the most bizarre interviews in 60 Minutes history. But tomorrow, it would be reset. New guest, new conversation, new opportunity to tell an important story. Because that's what they did here. They told stories. They asked questions. They held people accountable while treating them with dignity. And if someone couldn't handle that, if someone came in expecting special treatment and got upset when they didn't receive it, well, that said more about them than it did about Anderson or his team. The studio door closed behind him with a soft click, sealing off the space where